This is Karen White of Divine Time Astrology, and today I have my colleague and friend Channing Ayers with me. Thank you, Channing, for coming on my channel again today.
Always a good time. Thanks, Karen.
And we are going to be talking about, well, the stuff that's going on right now in the world. We will talk about the United States, and we're going to be using something called the mundane chart. And that is set for next March, actually, the day that the sun goes into Aries, the first day of spring. And what it does is it shows like the whole year. I believe it's from March to March, isn't it, Channing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it shows that whole astrological year for the country. So let's begin with the mundane chart. Okay, so here is the mundane chart for the United States. It's set for Washington, D.C., and it is March 20th of 2021.
Yeah.
And of course, the first thing we see is that Jupiter and Saturn are in Aquarius right in the Ascendant.
Yeah, that's going to have an impact on the United States. So this is basically a chart set for the United States, too. It's set for Washington, D.C. So what this is this is the ingress, the entering of the sun into the sign of Aries. And everywhere around the world, this is going to happen. So a chart can be set for any country, and you set it for the capital of that country. So this particular chart is set for the United States because Washington, D.C. is our capital.
So, and this is Kala software for anybody who's wondering.
Yeah. And so that will make the Ascendant Aquarius, where you could go to a different country and the Ascendant would be in a different sign. So that makes the Ascendant and all of the house cusps very important in this type of chart.
Right. So, and I don't know if you can see these. I'm not sure if our viewers can see this, but these little numbers here, these are the house cusps.
Well, the whole world is going to have this transit at this time, but yeah, those cusps will make it very unique for each country. So for the United States, it has Saturn on the Ascendant with Jupiter, and that's kind of an interesting influence there because Saturn's a planet of great restriction, discipline, slowing things down, a lot of focus. It is a good dignified Saturn. So Saturn is in a situation where it's getting a lot of support and it's getting a lot of strength. And Jupiter is here with Saturn as well. And Jupiter is the great benefic. And this is the result of the great conjunction, which we'll talk about in another video. So what we see is we see this Jupiter moving into a new sign from where it was last year, where it was all totally debilitated in the sign of Capricorn. And now it's gaining a little bit more strength, but it is still very involved with the planet Saturn. So that Saturn energy, it's just like if you're looking at a solar return chart for a person, for their natal chart, you're looking at the solar return. When you see that Saturn in the Ascendant, you know that Saturn is going to have a huge influence for the whole year. And that's an important thing to know about this upcoming year, because that's going to sort of govern the vibe for the year, which means that doing things in a very Saturn way, approaching things with the understanding of how Saturn works, is probably going to be a support for this upcoming year, understanding the nature of that Saturn, which is to take things slowly, to be a little bit more reserved, to to restrict yourself, to somehow restrain yourself, to stay very focused. All of those things are going to be more prominent, and people will probably have more success if they stick with the energy of Saturn coming up for the next year. If you fight Saturn, Saturn tends to become more difficult.
Right? Saturn wins no matter what. Now, I would like to add something here, and I want to cite my source, and this is mainly Western. And it's from a book called Mundane Astrology. And it's not by just one author. It's a compilation of authors. So H.S. Green, Raphael, and C.E.O. Carter. And according to this book, Saturn in the first house, if free from affliction, which we could say it basically is because it's with Jupiter, and Jupiter delights any planet that he's with. So it preserves law and order, crime is repressed, trade and commerce benefit, and the laws are fairly administered. So that's pretty good. And it gives some power and success to the nation, but not socially, but in the capacity of administrators and embodiers of law and order.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting because I know that Kamala Harris, she was I believe she was a prosecutor, a lawyer before. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think this is going to set the tone in some regards for the upcoming year having a restrictive nature to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that may actually be implemented in the laws in some regards. So I'm not sure if this means total shutdown, because we've got Saturn in such a good dignity and Saturn's getting delighted by Jupiter. So that doesn't necessarily, to me, seem like everything's closed, but it does seem like that there's a lot more restrictive laws that are happening to keep everyone safe, basically, to try and really knock this thing down a little bit. And we haven't really had anything like that. We had in some states, there were people being told to shelter in place and stay at home, but then after a certain amount of weeks passed, everyone just kind of went back to normal in a lot of places. So the restrictive energy wasn't quite effective in the sign of Capricorn. Now it's coming into the sign of Aquarius, where it's going to be more focused on ideas, science, more of these innovative ideologies and, trying to get ahead of this virus is what it looks like. That Saturn in the first house, that's what it looks like to me.
Okay, so now I've added the outer planets as well. And luckily this time Mercury is farther away from Neptune than it was this past year.
Right. What we're going to be dealing with this coming year is the Saturn squaring Uranus. Let's see, what do we got? I mean, Saturn Uranus has been specifically, let's see, I have a very European perspective on it, on this book that I got by Andre Barbault, who's well known for his cycle, talking about the different cycles and stuff like that. Okay, let's see. The intervals between Saturn-Uranus conjunctions are about 45 and a half years. So they're spaced out. So we've got the conjunction, and then the square, and then the opposition, and then the conjunction again, right? So that's about a 45 and a half year cycle, which would give us about 11 years, right? Give or take 11 and a half years, 11 and a quarter years for each of these times that Saturn is getting involved with Uranus.
What is it usually associated with, Uranus, in mundane charts?
Uranus is mostly associated. Okay, so Uranus is associated with technology, sudden innovations, movement, right? So it can actually have to do, in the Western mentality, they talk a lot about Uranus being involved with things like earthquakes or sudden upsets in the earth. And
so is Mercury, by the way, in horary astrology.
Mm-hmm. Right. So there's so many. Yeah, there's so many interesting associations between the two systems, and then and then we can get more into like even Hellenistic astrology, because there's so much more being discovered about Hellenistic astrology these days, which kind of taps into the Vedic and into the Western, and it has roots in both of these things. And they talk about comets and eclipses and, you know, all sorts of stuff that can be involved in all of these types of things, the North and South Node. But just Uranus in general is about things that are new and things that are sudden and things that are bringing about change, right? Uranus is a very change-oriented type of planet. And so Saturn involved with that can bring a lot of focus to that Uranus, a lot of pinpointed kind of, I think of this as a, you know, as a step towards technology, but not an easy step, or not necessarily a step that is in harmony, because we've got the square that's going on with it. So it could be technologies that, you know, we may be jumping too far in advance, or we may.
It was making me think, like, because there's a big thing about the G5 that you hear all the time,
the
about
5G.
Not 5G. I mean, that whether or not it's a good thing.
Well, there's all there, and the thing is that it's probably not going to slow down at any point here. So this Saturn Uranus may bring it into sort of a cold, hard reality. You know, Saturn's sort of cold and hard and has very much to do with the truth of things, and then Uranus is going to be bringing this change. There may be some realities that we get faced with this.
Well, that's true. And, you know, according to this book that I mentioned before, I just want to point out some of the things that that these authors have to say about Uranus in the third. And I'm going to go with the cusp here. Mm-hmm. If it's well aspected, well, with Saturn being such a close square to it, I guess you could say it's yes and no, simply because Saturn is so highly dignified. And dignified planets always have good things with them too, even when they're cruel planets. Mm-hmm. But anyway, discoveries, inventions, new ideas, enterprises, or achievements. Railways. You know what? It's interesting. I saw a video the other day on this thing that they're experimenting with. It's an underground railway that goes over 100 miles an hour. And it's like inside of a tunnel. Mm-hmm. And they were testing it out. Anyway, means of transit, means of communication, science, and then let me see, education too, because there have been some big changes in education because of COVID. Now, and also too, but because Saturn is squaring it, there could be some accidents and some other trouble connected with railways and, you know, motor cars, aviation, the post office. The post office. Oh no. So, and the new ideas may be equally well introduced, but there will be difficulty or trouble attending them, which is kind of what you just said. Mm-hmm. So there you go.
There's the square, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, the outer planets are used in so many different ways, and I love looking at them. Like, you know, they're so fascinating to me, but I also realize we can't overuse them for prediction. We have to sort of understand that these are bigger cycles. You know, these are generational cycles and cycles of human consciousness evolving, then the imprint that's adding to this evolutionary process. So, you know, we can't just kind of micro look at this. We have to also understand this is part of a bigger cycle. And this cycle, which we will talk about, I think, more in depth, but this Jupiter-Saturn cycle is a big deal. And so the fact that Uranus is sort of getting pulled into it has an impact even more beyond just Saturn and Uranus being squared, but that Saturn and Uranus and Jupiter are all involved with each other for this ingress, and also for this cycle of Jupiter and Saturn conjuncting. So all of that, sort of what you just said, makes so much sense in a lot of ways. So. we're going to be contending with that Uranus, Jupiter, Saturn involvement for quite some time, probably.
Yeah, looks like it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know what I keep looking at here, Channing? I can't help it. Being a human, I'm always looking for, like, okay, where's the tough part? And we have Rahu with the moon and Mars.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking that's about?
Well, I think that anything with Rahu gets amplified, right? And so we've got this kind of chaotic head of the dragon that's involved, Rahu, with Mars and the moon there. And the moon is the public, the moon are the people, the moon is the general population, and Mars is the military,
Yeah,
right?
right. It's the military, and the moon rules the sixth. So I'm wondering if this is more, at least this coming year, more involvement with COVID-19.
Yeah.
Um, in ways that, well, we're not going to like.
No, it doesn't
I
look.
don't know about you, but I was totally sick of wearing masks when I have to go somewhere, but I hardly ever go anywhere, so it's tolerable. What I feel bad for are the people who have to wear them all day long because of where they're working
Yeah.
and how tough that is. And I just, gosh, another year of this? Wow. And do you think that's what it's saying?
I think that I think that there's a couple different things in here. Yeah, the moon being the sixth. What we've got here too is this is in the fifth sign, but we've got the fourth house cusp with it. And so the fourth, Mars in the fourth, is kind of a difficult placement for Mars in general. It creates a sort of upset in the home or in the harmony, or in this circumstance we've got the homeland, right? So this looks like, to me, this looks like a strong connection between the military and the people at home. So there may be something happening with military involved in a way that we probably haven't seen before in our own daily reality for a little while, for this year at least. And Rahu could be foreign people as well. So this could be something involved with foreign influences as well here. So that's interesting.
Okay, it's not retrograde at least. Because in mundane astrology, Mars retrograde is associated with more things like disease, death, infectious diseases, epidemics, fevers, that kind of stuff. So it's not retrograde. That helps.
Yeah.
Now, but it is with the moon, and that is tough, like you were saying. Now, it's in the, so like you were saying, Mars doesn't do much good there, but fires, accidents, or disturbances connected with mines, houses, quarries, agriculture, or infertility or of the land, like dry seasons and crops.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if this is simply because so many people have not been able to work, like usual because of COVID. And so things are suffering in every area of society, including agriculture.
Mm-hmm. That's possible. When you see the fifth house cusp getting involved in there too, I think of it as education. So the school systems, and there's possibly an upset to things like entertainment and hobbies. So that's like going to the movies or going to concerts and stuff like that. That's fifth house kind of stuff. So there could be some, some restrictive energy. It doesn't look necessarily terrible, because we also have this nice Venus that's involved over there in the sign of
Yes,
Pisces.
the planet
So
of
Venus
healing.
sort of also aspects this little situation that's going on here too, and that does bring something positive. Like you said, anytime that there's a planet and that's really well dignified, it's going to have something good to share, and Venus does share goodness, right? So there are some comforts, and there's healing involved, and we're not going to be completely without, but I do think that there's going to be some level of restrictions and maybe some influence, some upsets, some possible violence, and we have been seeing this already. We've been seeing a lot of looting and rioting, and just whether you're into it or not, it is different. It's more violence than we've seen in our own country. It's like we turn on the news and it sort of looks like what's been going on in a lot of other countries for so long is sort of starting to happen here. There's like kind of an uprising around a clash around belief systems and around political belief systems and around kind of really amplifying this Jupiter Saturn conjunction in the sign of Aquarius. And that this, it all comes back to this right here, is that we're leaving a cycle that we haven't. We're moving into a new cycle. We're leaving an old cycle. We're leaving the earth cycle and we're moving into the air cycle. So that is a clash. And because of there's bigger forces that are going on in the, in the planets here, in the whole sort of universal picture, and how humanity is involved in this is very interconnected with how these planets are doing. And these planets are showing that we're moving into a new cycle. So when I see Mars involved just for this year, I think, okay, there's going to be some clashes still going on. There's going to be some upsets. There might be some violence. There's going to be some, really strong oppositions that are taking place, and it's going to be happening within our own soil, within our own country. So this is kind of it looks like a good year to lay low, honestly, with Saturn. And
it does.
It's not a great year for like vacations or traveling all over the place, because when you have Rahu involved, it's unexpected. Things are popping up suddenly. Things are happening that you weren't necessarily thinking that would ever happen. These are going to be things that are sort of shocking, the things that happen because of Rahu's involvement.
Now, the other thing to remember about Rahu is that Rahu is technology too. And Mars and Rahu and the moon, they're all in the sign of Gemini. So ruled by Mercury. And so there could be things having to do with schools and education. And there probably will be some pushback on some of that. Because I happen to know of some kids who are having to stay home and do their schoolwork through the computer, and they're not doing well with that at all.
Mm-hmm. I just saw a website for basically robot police.
What?
Robot police.
Oh my God. Mm-hmm. Oh no, I don't like that. Yeah, so I can see there being some real pushback against that. That is scary.
Robot security guards, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I don't normally watch a whole lot of TV, but with everything that's been going on, I've been sort of going through the channels, and I saw a commercial for this company, and I went to go. I said I couldn't understand what it was. I went to go look at it, and it was robot security guards being advertised like on regular TV.
I can't imagine how that's going to work. I mean, dealing with conflict requires so much finesse.
It's going to be, they're like security guards. And so they sort of roll around like on tires and they monitor the premises, and they'll probably be able to like call the police and record anything that's happening. They probably won't have.
So that's fine, as long as they're not armed.
Oh my gosh, that hasn't happened yet.
Okay, now I want to switch over to something good, because by now probably everybody's like, oh no, I wish I had watched this video. Venus is actually in the first by cusp, so it's still there. And Venus in the first promotes peace, contentment, prosperity in the country. So, and amusements increase and flourish. It's good for holiday making, public rejoicings, marriages. Movements of interest or benefit to women. So that's good. And it's exalted. So it's a really strong Venus. It's not just Venus, it's Venus exalted in Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
So there is still some of, everything's mixed. There's always good and bad.
And we also know we're in a cycle of change. I mean, anybody who's been paying attention to sort of what's going on out there and or just internally can tell there's an unsettling vibration that's been happening for a little while now. And so none of this is meant to scare anybody. It's just meant to sort of look at the map and say, okay, what do the next few years have to look like? Because we are transitioning. We're going through something. It doesn't mean that it has to be scary that Mars and the moon are together. It's just that this is something to pay attention to.
That's true. There are other significations for Mars too. Mars is not 100% military and explosions and things like that. It's also real estate and building. It's a problem solver. Without Mars, we wouldn't have we wouldn't have probably any of the modern conveniences that we have.
It's just more that with Mars, with Rahu, we're not going to necessarily be as clear about it. We're going to have things are going to happen problems are going to crop up that we're not aware of until they show up. So there's going to be on your toes energy with this one.
True, which always happens with technology. It's always after the fact, way after the fact, right? Then we're like, oh, well, what was once a great thing, like DDT, for instance, right, turned out to not be such a great thing. In many scientific advancements that we've made, we found out after the fact, long after the fact, the harmful side of it. And that's just the nature of being human. Mm-hmm. Because we're the way that we are, we're not going to stop, advancing and learning, and we can't stop science or technology. It's not possible. And so there's always the downside of that, like the sign of Gemini, right? One is a man with a club and the other one is a woman with a lute. So we get wonderful, wonderful things, and then there's the downside. So I'm wondering, because Mars is in Gemini, if there's going to be like something along those lines, the qualities of Gemini.
Well, we can see Mercury is not doing so well in the sign of Pisces. And we had Mercury debilitated last year for the ingress in 2020. And Mercury last year was ruling the 10th cusp, which showed some pretty serious mismanagement happening with our authorities and the people in charge. And so this year, it's not going to be quite that, because we have a different ascendant, but we still have that Mercury in Pisces. And that, that's right. Mercury is ruling that 4th and 5th cusp. So it sort of does show that there's some mismanagement that's still happening around some of this.
Mismanagement, and also not being able to trust your sources of information. Because Mercury is the press as well. And it's debilitated. And last year it was conjunct Neptune. At least this year it's a bit further away from Neptune. Yeah.
And I think we've got that going on with Rahu in the sign of Gemini just as well. We've got so much upset in the sign of information. Gemini is, where our information comes from. And so I would just, everything that you're reading, everything that you're listening to, all of it, expect it to have some slant to it, some obstacle to knowing the exact truth of it.
Yeah. So. This is true. Now, the sun in the 3rd house, because the sun, of course, is what creates the mundane chart. It's the ingress into the first day of spring. And so where the sun is important, obviously, in this mundane chart. So it's in the 3rd, and this benefits railways, the post office again, education again, improved business. Some advance may take place in one or other of these directions. The king, royalty, or prominent people may travel a great deal or undertake activities connected to this house. I don't think that it's very afflicted, just because it depends on what orb you want to use with the planets. Seems to be, it's at 0 degrees.
Well, it's not with anything.
It would be. It's not with anything. Yeah.
Which is nice. Would you look at it for the second house just because the sun is that?
Of course. So that is the earning power of the nation is good. Mm-hmm. Trade and money matters generally will advance, but there is a likelihood of national expenditures and outgoings increasing also, especially, well, the sun's not much afflicted, so I wouldn't say it's very afflicted. When taxation may become heavier. And I've heard this, I don't know if this is true, because I am not a political person. I very rarely pay attention to these things. But every now and then I tune in, right, because of astrology, because astrology gives me a perspective that nothing else can. But I've always heard that when Democrats are in office, taxes increase. I don't know if that's actually true, though.
Well, what I've heard Biden say is that he's not going to raise anyone's taxes who doesn't make $400,000 a year.
Okay, well, that leaves us out.
So it doesn't affect me. I'm looking at this, and it's interesting because I see the wealth. Okay, so the very wealthy, the aristocrats, the 1%, they're Jupiter, right?
Yeah.
And so Jupiter is being overshadowed by Saturn. So I could see that as some element of possible taxation or limitations. And the sun in the second, when you read that about the possibility of taxation, I do think that that's strong. That's a strong possibility. But I would say that it's probably more likely that it's going to be the bigger economic picture. I don't think it's necessarily going to be taxing people like you and me.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and Saturn is a planet that represents the common man too, and it's in the first house, prominent there. So there's probably going to be more of an emphasis on, like, one of the things that Biden said was that he wanted to restore the middle class, or keep it from disappearing, which is a big concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting in the mundane charts because it's always going to be the sun in its exaltation. The sun is always going to be in the sign of Aries. So I do look at, what is that sun aspecting, and is there anything that's really difficult with the sun? And this sun isn't showing too much difficulty on its own necessarily. So it could. I think that sun there is going to hold the economy together. That's one of the questions that I've been looking and getting a lot of, which is the economy going to crash? And, what's going to happen? This Jupiter-Saturn cycle is kind of notorious for economic swings. In this one, we can see we've got the debilitated Mercury and Venus in the second sign, and then Sun in the second cusp, and then the Lord of the second cusp is Mars over there with Rahu and the Moon. I think there could be some unexpected events that are taking place here, but that there's also some strong forces to sort of keep it together and hold it together. So it doesn't necessarily look like a crash to me, but that it does look like there might be still some restrictive energy, some restrictions on our growth, just because of Jupiter being with Saturn in the first house to a certain extent, and then the second Lord Mars being with Rahu and the Moon. So that could bring in some sort of unexpected twists that are over.
Yeah, and at this point, I do want to mention that Channing and I are going to do another video on the eclipses for next year, for 2021, because there are some really good ones, positive ones coming up. So just remember that.
Yeah, this video is more focused on just specifically on this chart, which is called the Ingress chart, just to give us the flavor of the year. It's not the whole story.
So
it's just giving us clues.
it's giving us clues, right? Now, the moon is very important in the mundane chart because the moon represents the people. It's the significator of the people, contrasted to like the people in power. Now, the moon is in the 4th and the 5th by the cusp. And so what that means, according to these authors, is it's fortunate for the people, for the crops, the land and occupations connected with it, like mining, building, and the aged poor. It strengthens the democracy and prospers movements benefiting the people. Now, there is some affliction to it. So you have to mention that there will be people who are discontented and there will be some suffering, of course. And then troubling questions arising out of the affairs of this house may disturb the nation. So, and maybe some accidents connected with mines or buildings, that kind of thing, because Mars is there. But because it's the moon and it's in those houses, the moon loves to be in the 4th. It's his favorite house. It's where he's really strong. I still see that there's some good things coming for us. What do you have to say about that, Channing? I mean, you see something.
I know you do. I do. I always see something.
Look, Venus is aspecting.
I see it as a bigger cycle, honestly. I see it as a bigger cycle. And that this is a year, honestly, 2020 and 2021 have both been on my radar for a long, long time. And I'm just staying at home, entertaining myself, being pretty restricted in my activities and my social life and all of those things. And I'm trying to just make the best of it, honestly, because I realize it's for a bigger picture. And we just sort of need to get through this. And so the more we can help each other through this kind of thing. I mean, when I look at this mundane chart, does it look like the scariest year ever? No. It doesn't look like that, but it does.
It was much worse.
Yeah, you can see that Mars Moon Rahu is going to create something that is not necessarily what we're used to, right? Anything with Rahu is things that are unexpected, things that are coming out of nowhere.
Rahu is good in the sign of Gemini.
Well, Rahu and Mercury do get along. Mercury is impacted as strongly.
Right.
But when we see the Lord of Rahu, Mercury, being debilitated.
Though helped by an exalted Venus.
Yeah. Now, when we go back and we look at last year's chart, we can see.
You want to do that? Let's look at that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so this is 2020.
So look at Venus.
Yes, here Venus is in Taurus, which is not bad. It's in the 7th. And the year is almost over. So what would you say in hindsight that has been about? Because that's the house of foreign countries in Vedic astrology.
This might be that other countries are faring better with this virus than we are.
Oh, that's true. That is true.
The other countries are doing great because they're the ruler of the 7th and they're the ruler of the 12th, which is faraway places as well. We can just see how this impacted us. We already have the hindsight of what 2020 was like, and all of these planets were together in that one sign. And in this chart, it would be in the 2nd house if we're looking at the cusps with the mundane. And that really showed with a lot of people suffering economically.
Yep.
Because of the shutdowns of business and shutdowns of commerce and such. We're not getting that impact for 2021. 2021.
Well, in 2020, the sun was in the 6th by sign and the 5th and the 6th by cusp.
Yeah.
So that's illness and disease.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's what we've been dealing with.
So where the sun is very important for that Ingress chart.
Exactly. And now it's out of that house. Now it's about rebuilding the economy. That's in the 2nd. Well, then this be interesting to look at the end of this next year. Okay, well, Chenny, thank you for joining me on this video, and I will see you next time.
Bye.